Hello, this is Stephen Matchett from Campus Morning Mail with Expert Opinion, where we ask people who know what's going on in higher education, what's going on. After 25 years, the federal government ended funding for the Australian Awards for University Teaching as of this year. The coalition had also cut funds for the National Learning and Teaching Repository, and back in 2016, it entered the Office for Learning and Teaching itself. But it's worth remembering that disregard for teaching can be bipartisan. The Gillard government had to be talked out of abolishing the office in 2012. But now there is good news, just not from the government. The teaching awards continue, definitely this year. Universities Australia has levied members to support them, which is good. But the big question remains, what nationally funded resources for learning and teaching could accomplish? And so it is welcome to two women who know a great deal about this to talk about what needs to be done, what could be done, what indeed should be done. Liz Johnson is DVCE at Deakin University, where her portfolio includes the immensely well-regarded CRADLE, that's the Centre for Research in Assessment and Digital Learning. And she chairs the Citation Committee for this year's Teaching Awards. Hello, Professor.
Hello, Stephen. Lovely to be here.
And the alarmingly industrious Sally Kift joins us. Sally is commissioning editor of the best-known section of CMM, the best-read section of CMM, certainly. It's her celebrated series, Needed Now in Learning and Teaching. Among the many other hats she wears, one is the presidency of the Learning and Teaching Fellows. And she's also chair of the Career Achievement Award Committee for this year's awards. And hello to you, Professor Kift.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Good to be here.
Liz, let me start with you. That there is a bunch of research and experimenting always underway in learning and teaching at individual Australian institutions. I think there's an international regard for what is done. But is there a way for people to connect it all, put it all together?
Not as much as there used to be. You're quite right in pointing to the role of, firstly, the Australian Learning Teaching Council and then the Office for Learning and Teaching, which were fantastic connectors across the sector and deliberately sponsored a great deal of collaboration between universities. There is collaboration still, so the university groupings do collaborate together as the Group of 8 or my own, the ATN universities, the IRU universities, the regional universities. They have various collaborations which come together, but none are as powerful as having that national viewpoint. And I think the other thing that was really important about the national viewpoint is it looked across disciplines really well. So there are schemes to foster learning and teaching within individual disciplines, but they then are confined within that space. And it's much more rich and more generative if you look across disciplines as well.
Sally, what can be done about that?
Well, Stephen, I think it'd be fair to say that we're in a situation now where we need investment, research and development, to be frank, in learning and teaching more than ever before. If you just even begin to run through the list, as I did thinking about this session now with you, about the sorts of imperatives that we're all seeking to address. So there's assessment, assessment integrity, online learning, blended learning and hybrid learning, the whole intercultural competency around indigenising curriculum and Indigenous perspectives, lifelong learning, micro-credentials, employability, skills, enterprise and entrepreneurial learning, industry engagement, mental health and wellbeing, VET, HE, collaboration, equity always. I mean, there's a laundry list of things that we need to grapple with. This is a world-class education system that we're investing in. We talk a lot about research and development more broadly and as a nation, and we don't do it so much in our own industry. And we can't be the only industry that doesn't need that sort of investment. So I think we look at hope towards the new government, but I think we also need to be somewhat realistic. There are a range of challenges it faces. It's already made great strides by talking about early childhood education, and that's where we all start. VET has been underfunded for years. I mean, there is considerable work to be done there, but we're part of that. We have to be part of the solution in terms of national productivity and prosperity moving forwards, as well as what we do in research. But it's the education piece that I'm particularly concerned about.
Yeah, let's come back to how we convince in a bit. But first up, it seems to me that what these conversations are has to be more that they do more than a conference. They do more than journals, that they are a living ecosystem in which constant interface and interchange. Sally, I know that from looking at the traffic and correspondence your series generates. People talk about it, and it's that, and that's that vehicle for a conversation that seems to be what's lacking.
Absolutely, and it's the point that Liz has already made. The return on investment on quite meagre national investment in learning and teaching. At its peak, it was only about $88 million, and then it descended to 54 million, 28 million, and then down to zero. It didn't really seem to matter what the quantum was. It was the faith placed in the visibility and the necessity to promote education and learning as a national priority. The return on investment of those quite meagre sums that someone described to me once as a rounding error in government budgets has always been quite remarkable. And you see it even with the awards still. The in-kind and the expertise that is placed into running on the smell of an oily rag, the National Teaching Awards, given the collaborations and the panels that assess, all the academic experts and others who do their collaboration and calibration of assessments. It's a remarkable return on investment, and it really doesn't need that much. I think one of the big success factors around the CARE Institute, the Australian Learning and Teaching Council, the Office for Learning and Teaching, was the requirement to disseminate quite broadly. So I think we almost had an embarrassment of riches at one point, where people going, oh gosh, I've got to learn more about my day job. But it was this constant parade of and I think, thank you, Stephen, I think it's a bit what you see with the CMM series. It's that outlet about what good practice is and how we might build on it.
Despite the amount of conversation it generates, it is often, in the past, it has often been in the shop for people in the shop. The old awards were, in some cases, not well disposed to telling media what was going on. I used to suffer from that myself. Is it a question that the industry has talked too much to itself? Liz?
Possibly, and certainly we do tend to do things in our own way and use our own language to do it. I think one of the things that was really, Sally was pointing to, which is really important, is that the work is focused on practice. It's focused on outcomes and what actually happens on the ground. And that's what we need to celebrate and talk to media and others about when we talk about the awards. When we've been thinking about what to do with the AUT awards and how we can keep them flourishing, one of the things that I personally would like to see, and I know many colleagues do, is to reinstate some of that dissemination work, so that we do bring our awardees to talk to colleagues outside universities, to talk to industry partners, to talk to schools, to talk to other educators, so that they share their expertise and we share what we think excellence looks like, because we need to be more porous. We need to be talking to others about what excellence means in our hands.
I wonder if now is not a great time to be doing this, simply because the game in so many ways has changed. I mean, you've got people who are experts in stuff that didn't really exist 5 years ago. And I think
I absolutely agree. And this comes to the fore. One of the laundry lists that Sally pointed to was the whole world of micro-credentials and short courses. They belong as much outside education providers as they do inside, and there's real richness in that discussion when we talk to industry partners about what does good teaching look like for you, and then we compare it to what we say about good teaching. We're both learning then, and it's a really productive conversation. So we need to use our markers of excellence, such as the awards, we need to use them to broker our conversations, to make sure that we're sharing what we call excellence.
If Sally, if the head of personnel or internal learning for a bank or a medium-sized industrial company wanted to know about micro-credentials, what that meant for their employees, what they could do to develop, where would they go to look?
We could point them to a range of resources, obviously. We could also point them to the Australian Technology Network, which has just run, is in the midst of running a sort of a national series of symposia on micro-credentialing and trying to broaden out the conversation. But I think part of what Liz was alluding to is this idea that of education as one of the brokers for national conversations across sectors. Perhaps we have been too insular by focusing more on our higher education remit. I think those days are long gone, and micro-credentials point to that, but as does lifelong learning, which UNESCO is talking now of in terms as a human right. So how we activate that in practical, impactful ways across the nation, across sectors, with industry, with learners at the centre. I think the repositioning of learners is quite important. How we engage nationally with the big questions, the big discussions that need to occur. For example, the Australian Qualifications Framework Review, which I know is everyone's favourite subject, certainly is mine. That you know, like most things, they're hard and they're difficult. But if we need to get to the next stage, we need to be the proponents of big change for big ideas, for big nation building. It just makes us internationally competitive, and it's what I see other nations doing. The way we are with education in its siloed disarray, if I might be so bold at the moment, places us on the back foot internationally. You look to other countries where they take education and investment in education and learning and research and its development in the ways that we might best go about that. They take it seriously and they're going to reap the rewards.
Is it less disregard for university teachers, in the broadly defined policy community, as just not a real sense of awareness that this is core university business, that there is more to higher education, further education than research? It is about talking to large numbers of younger people and people retraining, that we have massified the system and it is not an elite process anymore.
It's tricky to unpick that, actually, because it's interesting. Why does research get so much prestige? And part of the reason is it's easy to count. There's lots of things to count. You can count dollars, you can count papers, you can count patents, you can count industry partnerships, there's lots of things to count. And if you don't have standards, visible standards that people can point to for learning and teaching, it's easy to assume that it's just okay. And of course, it does just keep going. I mean, we have students all the time. We kept going despite a global pandemic. And so we persist with that. The question is can we be confident in the excellence of what we do? I personally think Australian higher education is excellent. It's generally of a very high standard, and we need to be able to evidence that. There are many ways of doing that, and the awards are one amongst many. But the important thing is to actually make sure that that prestige is visible. So when you have somebody who's an award winner, let's make sure that everybody understands just why we think they're so good. One of the big things about the AAUT awards that Sally pointed to was there's real rigour in the selection process there. And having sat on panels for a number of years now, and great pleasure in chairing the citation one, the awards that are coming through are seriously good, but so are the assessors that assess them. So are the communities that support them. So there's lots of ripple out effects about what those standards mean.
It is that the whole role of our education-focused academics can become quite vexed in an industrial relations context. But nevertheless, the fact that now we are still looking towards people focusing on teaching as an honourable profession in higher ed just does seem a little, we've got a way to go.
Yes, although really, because We have specialists all the time. We have specialists in research. Why wouldn't we have specialists in learning and teaching? We will have, if we don't already, have specialists in industry relations and specialists in application. All those specialisms will come because we're increasingly sophisticated about what we do. I think we're getting a much better idea of how to do education-focused roles well. There was certainly a period there where education-focused meant something lesser, but I think that's going. And I would point to Merlin Crossley's recent contribution in CMM about sabbatical for education-focused roles. That kind of work points to a serious recognition of the specialism and the expertise that's involved when you take that seriously.
Sally?
Oh, no, I absolutely agree. I was reminded when Liz was talking of the marvellous Lee Schulman's exhortation that you don't reward good teaching with more teaching. There needs to be a point at which you reflect and build on practice. And at the risk of embarrassing Liz and aggrandising myself, I think we should also point to the return on investment in education and fellowships and awards and grants. Liz and I are both Australian Learning and Teaching Fellows. So, you know, I'll talk about Liz, not myself. We need to grow our own learning leadership in this country, and be assured about what that means for Australia and its aspirations. You know, these things don't just happen by happen chance. There needs to be investment in it and recognition and reward, I think, to some extent, to make it valued and visible. The reward doesn't need to be very much. And I think the fact that the Australian University Teaching Awards are continuing on since 2018 with much lesser monetary aggrandisement, I'm sorry, I always get anxious talking about it, is probably a testament to that. We had this discussion back in the day when it was threatened in 2012, when it disappeared in 2016, and then more recently when the Office for Learning and Teaching closed down. If we were going to keep any of the awards, if we had to choose, I think it was the citations that almost the whole sector agreed were the most important. They're rewarded now by a certificate, but the pride and the visibility and the impact within institutions of citation winners is absolutely astounding and outstanding. It's because it's recognising the practice-based efforts at a very, you can never say coal face now, I'm like a computer face level, across sessional staff, and students have been awarded in citations as well as educators very broadly.
That's a really important point. Is that a way? To? Do we need to promote the citations, to make it an honorific, to make it something that people use as a postnomial?
It's interesting because I was reflecting on it before we started this conversation. The citations and the awards are criterion referenced, but they're competitive. The fellowships, which Sally pointed to, were interesting because they were about what you would do. They were about action. And it's interesting. I wonder whether there's a clue there about how we bring together both the recognition and the rewards of doing. Because Sally's quite right. Sector of the fellows, the people that got fellowship through the ALTC and the OLT, have gone on to be enormous contributors to the sector. And I will point to Sally, who is definitely an enormous contributor to the sector. That process fosters a expertise that's then shared. And so that's the interesting thing I think we can look at, is how do we use the awards to share expertise and knowledge and inspiration, apart from anything else, more widely. There are lots of things that hang off the awards within universities, as Sally said, which are then, they're all about getting to the award, as was reported some time ago by colleague Mark Israel. They're all about getting to the award and less about what you do with it afterwards. And I think that's the trick. We need to bring that together with action that comes afterwards, recognise that expertise and put it to work, because people actually really like sharing their expertise.
That's a really good point. We're short on time, so let me ask you both. If you had 5 minutes with the minister, what would you say?
I'd urge him to invest in quality. The quality of the Australian education system depends on setting good standards and then showing people how they can innovate and step beyond them. So this is a way of doing it, and it's a way of promoting excellence in the system.
Sally?
And so I go back to, I mean, I don't want to go to the future in the past, but we really were onto something with the Australian Learning and Teaching Council and the Office for Learning and Teaching. They were halcyon days for Australian higher education, and we're still reaping the benefits of it. You know, it's almost a decade since serious investment's gone into that. So I would urge a reinstatement of investment in learning and teaching, an ARC for learning and teaching, a centre of excellence for learning and teaching. You know, we shouldn't still be having these discussions about investment in research versus investment in learning and teaching. What we do in learning and teaching matters, and it pays dividends all round for Australia as a nation and its peoples. Its primary focus, I think, is around bringing everyone to realise their potential in lifelong learning space that we now must be in. It has to be educational opportunity has to be available for all citizens, and it has to be, as Liz has just said, quality and equitably available. To do that at scale with best return on investment, we need to keep iterating and enhancing, and that requires serious attention, and you don't reward it by asking you just to do more of the same with less, which is what's happening at the moment.
Ladies, that's a great way to finish. Thank you both very much for your time. We will come back to this. Liz Johnson-Deakin, Sally Kift, many thanks for being here this afternoon, and we're out. Bye.